Hangout on Air lives, but unlisted. So, oh, there's the microwave door. Love it. Okay.
Hi.
Hello and welcome, Bev.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
As usual.
Is me here?
No,
Or is
it's
it
just
you?
me
No,
all over the
please.
place.
So if you want to follow along, we are once again at our lovely BPL site. And if you go, depending on your screen resolution, it may be under more and then competencies, but it's just competencies if you've got a real large screen. And I will let you take a moment to get there, and then we'll talk about what we're going to be doing today.
That's BPL site, right?
You got it, and lowercase.
Oh, it's lowercase.
Even though I write in all uppercase,
Okay.
it's all lowercase. I apologize.
I have that bookmark. I'm impressed with myself.
Yeah, nice work. You gotta be able to do it.
I do
so.
too, now that you say that, because it just showed me that
Hey, I like it.
under resources.
It's a super valuable resource. So you can see some of the work that we have done previously. We have started doing drafts of the 21st century skills competency progressions for students and adults. If that whole idea does not ring a bell super strongly for you, it's essentially the actual application of the 21st century skills and what it looks like in the classroom and the evidence that we would use to say you have demonstrated this competency either as a student or as a educator. And so we are looking to create these progressions that say, yes, you have demonstrated in second grade what collaboration looks like, and now you are also demonstrating it in 8th grade, and you are also, because it looks different in those 3 areas or across that spectrum, right? We're also going to be doing and are doing that for the adults. And the work that we did this past time, if you can click on either one of these spreadsheets, and we started to, and you may have to click the open again, so it like opens up in its own little area, but essentially, we said, all right, so what is the learning task that would apply that skill? What is the demonstration criteria or evidence for the competency? And then what is the opportunity for further reflection, personalization, deeper learning? And that to me was really valuable. And we had some considerations for how do we continue to sort of build that out. But Noah had a really great comment on essentially, all right, we're talking about the what, how, and the so what of the competency itself. So these are all words. So we had a couple of examples that we went through, and you can look across the progression to see a few more examples. But one of the things that we have consistently run into is the idea that even if we have these as words, it still doesn't necessarily show what it looks like to demonstrate the competency. What is the student evidence of this competency? What does it look like? And that is where I would like to play the majority of our time today. And so that's why I put all the way up at the top here. We're going to do an activity around a few images. And the idea is that we would like to have a visual representation of what this progress looks like. So what does it mean? What's the student work in second grade for collaboration? What does that actually look like? Especially if we're being asked, oh, well, we could say in our lovely little second grade, if the guest speaker comes in on career day, they are asking relevant questions directly of the guest speaker and receiving feedback from the expert. The opportunity would be, I would like to work with my friend or my peer to work through a real world problem that the guest speaker proposed. So that is telling a story, but then what does it actually look like to provide that evidence? And so I'm going to sort of stop and ask for questions because that's sort of a lot of background info and sort of framing. But the activity that we are going to be focused on today is actually talking about, well, how could we capture that visually? and what are the elements of that visual demonstration through the lens of student work. So let's start there, and Noah, who is virtually with us, and then you guys can ask questions.
Do I have access to that? You on the spreadsheet you were just at, is that on the website?
Yes, so if you, here, let me make sure that you're on the page that has it. So this is the front page, and if you go over to more and competencies, you should be good to go to be where we are.
I
Yep,
clicked myself out.
yeah, you're fine.
Oh, that's right. So when I looked, that's how I did this. So the experiences is when we did that blended course on Google Hangouts.
Yes, you got it.
Okay, that's why I went to that site. Okay.
No worries,
that
no
one.
worries. So now that you are here on the same page,
You want us on the kid one or the adult?
neither necessarily. Like you can be in the spreadsheets if you want to, but we're actually going to go into these images and actually start to talk about, all right, what does this represent? What is this a visual representation of in terms of the competencies themselves? Ryan, is that making sense to you?
I think so.
Ish? Okay.
Yeah.
Bev?
Once we do it all.
I think so.
Okay, yeah.
I think I think I'll.
Noah, our virtual participant, how does that feel? Unmute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It feels good. Just making sure when you say the images, you're talking the ones of the actual competencies themselves, or which images?
Yeah, so we're going to look at two sets of images that I have pulled specifically to have these conversations. So,
Gotcha.
Yep. And so on the competencies page, there is a link to Digital Learning Day 2016 excerpts and a link to student work. And so everybody with their little mouse pointers, would you click on the Digital Learning Day 2016 link? Okay. So at this link, you will see a series of images. These are all inside of the Google Photos. We'll wait till it fully loads for everyone, and hopefully that the internet does not crash while we are trying to do this.
Yeah, no,
No, it's having trouble.
did something, yeah, I had a couple.
Yeah, today was fun.
Is it just overloaded?
Yeah, the internet went down for us in district for about 45 minutes today. And so they're struggling to get it back up, but
I forget I have my hotspot. I can't
Yes.
remember that.
Yep.
Because I'm like, I don't ever use it. That would be
always a good backup plan for sure. So these examples were taken from an experience called Digital Learning Day, where around the world, teachers take pictures of student work and students working using digital tools, creating digital products, or just essentially learning. And so it is one of my favorite examples every year, and it's actually coming up here pretty shortly for 2017, where teachers get to be able to chronicle what it looks like to engage in this type of learning. And so what we are going to do is use these images. So if I am looking at, let's take the middle one right here. It says official DLD day, so it's mentioning that particular account. My students are using Minecraft and our makerspace to create a 3D to 2D on a 10 by 10 grid to calculate percentage. Okay, so they're creating a physical representation using the paper blocks. They are creating a 3D representation there using the three-dimensional manipulatives. And they are also doing it by creating it on the little device. Do you see how that works?
Yeah.
Okay. So all three are representations of percentage, okay, of how many black blocks there are, how many red blocks there are, and things like that. If we were going to say that this is a demonstration of a competency, so we can look back at those spreadsheets to say, which competency or competencies does this demonstrate? And so what I would like you to do is go through at least a couple of the images. And when you think that you have it, and you can sort of reference the spreadsheets again, just add a comment at the bottom there and say, this is what I think and here's why, okay? So this is the idea of how do we sort of come to an agreement, or how do we start looking at real student work or students working together as a way of evidencing the competencies that we want to see in our classrooms, okay? So that is a fairly complex task, but I think once you get into it, it's actually like, oh, I'm looking at pictures and commenting on them and saying what the 21st century skills are that I see here.
Oh, I can comment in here?
Yes. So there is a little add a comment button down at the bottom.
Oh yeah, I want to click on it.
Yep.
I have to.
Okay. So we're going to do probably about 5-10 minutes of doing that on our own, and then we'll take a look at the comments that we have aggregated and start to talk about what are some common things that we see when people are taking pictures of student work, when we're talking about it, etc. Okay? Questions before we get started? Noah, are you feeling good? Just chewing away? Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a great activity.
All right, awesome. So go at it and choose some pictures, start referencing the competency progression, and let's take a look. If I was smart, I would play music, but I think we're okay.
And are we doing the journey badge for this? Or are we doing the summit badge? Or just 21st century skills? I mean, they are the 21st century skills.
So they are the skills, but if you dig down into the spreadsheet itself, so if I look at the student one,
Yeah.
and I have that open, I'm saying, so it is the, right here, the competency name is interaction, which is in the 21st century skill of collaboration,
Okay.
right?
Communication.
Communication is in the 21st century skill of collaboration. Does that make sense?
Yes, so we're doing competency.
Yes, that's exactly right. So the competency name, that's a really good question.
So they're set. You can tell them that
Hmm. You guys are very quiet typers. I'm clacking away over here, and you're like, all right, maybe do two more. Just see the mitosis one.
Oh no, I didn't get that far.
That's right.
I have to say, most of this is in a STEM classes.
I'm having to spend time thinking about the definition.
Yeah. Yep. Is there something wrong with the STEM classes? Or?
I think I'm.
No, I'm thinking they lend themselves to this a lot easier than some of the other
I think that that's going to be
disciplines.
maybe a challenge for us to particularly seek that out. And so we'll look at the second set, which is maybe a little less about STEM. But I like starting here because I get all excited when I see this.
because I was grappling with the definition. I didn't rationalize.
That's totally fine.
I was just labeling. I was at a deal.
First, you got to tag it, then you got to figure out why you tagged it. No.
Deal game
Black or blue.
Yeah.
I'll search for you. Take it back. They used to give away 10 bags of pens. Stop it, take it back.
All right.
And the lunch.
So let's see what we saw.
Okay.
Okay. So should I open up? All right. So whoops, stop that. So you said on this very first one, interaction.
Yes.
Why?
Because they were, well, I'm assuming, because I'm inferring,
Right.
that they were talking to the expert and asking questions to the expert.
Yep.
But it was hard for me to say much of anything else. Not saying that other things weren't happening. I was just like on that first one, I was literally going by what I saw in the picture. And then as I started reading your guys, I'm like, oh, we're actually inferring.
Well, I mean, I think that there is that component, right? But when I look at that and you can see, yes, it is interaction, but it's also potentially awareness, right? Developing cultural understanding and global awareness, right? Like I am seeing what I could not see in my direct space.
Right.
And there's another example of that where they go on a virtual field trip and things like that, right? So seeing like the crossover there and actually making the case that it is multiple different things as well. Yep, like that. Here, should we do the second one where there are a couple there? Oh, no. Should do that one. I did this one. I want to do one that somebody else did.
It's very random. And not
You were just
systematic.
random, like going through?
I was like, which one seemed cool?
Ooh, 4 comments on
They're
this
all
one.
me.
They're all you. Lifelong learner, attitude, recognition, contribution.
See, I
How do you
started
see
getting
those
the hang
things?
of that. So then this is when I just started inferring. Well, on the definition, what did I write on my comments?
You said lifelong learner, attitude, recognition, and contribution.
So in the lifelong learner, it says demonstrate attributes of a lifelong learner.
Yep.
Obviously. So they're using, I mean, I thought they were researching, or one kid was researching. And then I said attitude. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to look at the definition. So exhibit a positive attitude that supports collaboration, learning, and productivity. They are clearly working together in that talk group.
Definitely.
And then I didn't know if that was a Google Doc that they're working on or they're typing in, but it looked like some type of.
Yeah, it's some type of
Collaborative.
document, right? That they're taking notes or, yep.
And then, what was another one I said?
You said contribution, recognition, attitude, and lifelong learner.
Oh, contribute to project teams to produce original works or solve problems. So I assumed they were working together to solve something.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just like.
Yep.
Write a definition.
All right, let's do 2 more here from, I want to find one that Noah, that you did. Did you start at the bottom, Noah? I feel like you might have.
I also was just kind of randomly clicking.
I see one. Okay. While this could be a stretch to acknowledge as demonstrating a competency, simulation seems like a good fit, where they structured their desks as if they were building Minecraft blocks, which I thought was rather interesting. Noah, why do you think that that's a stretch?
I don't necessarily think it's a stretch. Ooh, it's more just, sorry, my world's coming apart. I just knocked over chairs. My dog's barking. I think you'd really kind of want to see it. And at the risk of blabbing too much, I think one of the things this exercise is really kind of helpful about is thinking about, like, we see a lot of times with teachers badging students, and we can anticipate this will happen with adults. It's like, what competency here is being demonstrated? And sort of like in that last example, where a lot of times it's going to be when we're going granular that there's more than one competency that's being demonstrated, right? Like that if the Colorado Rockies center fielder Charlie Blackmon makes an amazing play in center field, he might be demonstrating foot speed, hand-eye coordination. He may even be demonstrating research because he knew where to be standing based on who the player was who was batting. And so it's kind of like when that I think that's where the evidence piece is, and that artifact is so important, is knowing kind of the steps that went into it. And so in this case, simulation, if depending on if it's an age appropriate example, they were at scale using desks to recreate something else. And so, depending on age group, I think that could be a really good example of simulation. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer to a simple question.
No. And that to me is actually pretty valuable to look at as you are saying, actually, when we are capturing classrooms or evidence, we're actually doing it not because we want to see one thing, but because we want to see all of the things or potentially multiple of these competencies. And so there's that example, right? There are all of those pretty engaged students, right? Like you're not taking a picture of students who are unengaged and sharing that as like an example of great learning. So the teacher is very clearly proud of that. But in the second set, we have some more maybe traditional examples of student work. And I don't think we have to go through the exercise of commenting on them, but if you go back to the link that we were at, and we look at a few of these images, I want to talk about the difference between what was captured in the first set and what's captured in this set. So take a moment to look at these.
How did I get to that?
Sorry, on the blended and personalized learning, it's the student work link. Does that make sense? And my favorite is opening up one image and then just using the arrow keys to go through them. So what do you see as the difference between what was captured in the first set and what is captured in this set?
Well, we don't have any how they got there.
Yeah, there's no like tweet about what is actually going on there, right? Like there's no context for the assignment or anything like that. Not that there was a huge amount of context in the 140 characters.
Yeah, sometimes.
Right?
Yeah, it could be a challenge with both, because I felt the same way. You had made the comment on the last photo that it could be a stretch. There is some inferring that you're doing about purpose for that, or how did they get to that point, the setup of that, and that's true here too.
Mm-hmm.
Although sometimes with some of these, like there was one solving a math problem, I'm not saying that was, but you could see the kid work, so you got a chance to see some of the process as well as the product.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say generally in the others, they were capturing process more than product.
Mm-hmm.
And these are more product rather than process.
Right. It was
generally. But.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. So there is a huge aspect of, when you're sort of capturing collaboration in action, like unless you are looking at then the outcome of that collaboration, you don't get to the sort of product side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the social attributes. One captures the social attributes, one doesn't.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So
I almost
capturing.
think of those product.
Sorry, go ahead, Noah.
Just adding on to the product and process, it could also be kind of nouns and verbs, right? The product, when we're looking at products, are kind of just the nouns, and we're seeing actions on the process side.
Yeah. So if we are thinking about the way in which we might create a visual progression, like in second grade, collaboration, interaction, awareness, like this is an example of those things. Do we need to be capturing both process and product? Do we need to be looking at, I mean, essentially like some combination of these things would lead us to believe this is what it looks like and this is what progress looks like, or demonstrating competency looks like.
This is where I think this overlaps with NGSS.
Say more.
So like our next generation science standards are 3-dimensional standards. So there's observable features, but then there's cognitive features that we can't necessarily capture in a, but then there's some practices that are social or interactive practices, and there's some practices that are not. Does that make so? Like engaging in an argument would be a social interaction. Writing a scientific explanation, I would have to do some of the social interactions to get to the explanation, but my product at that point is literally how can I develop that model and now explain it to somebody else to engage in another argument? Does that make sense?
I think so.
So it's kind of like we're looking at a multi-dimensional, where I feel like a lot of what we're saying in the 21st century is more of the observable features we would see kids doing. Not that we wouldn't expect good products to come from that, but it's more about what we would observe in a classroom around what 21st century engagement looks like versus
right, versus the
data,
the product, the student work.
And I'm not saying both wouldn't be relevant, but I think of data teams and a teacher's data team. I think this is helpful, but I think knowing how your room was structured and the culture and the strict structures and the systems that got you to produce that, it's kind of a cause effect.
Yeah, and I think the ability for us to say, this is what an experience that demonstrates, or a learning task that demonstrates all of these different competencies, or could, and then this is what student work looks like coming out of that, right? And so if you are saying these are the observable behaviors, and I kind of like that sort of phrasing around, yeah, I'm able to observe self-direction in action, right? But then what is the work that then comes out of that self-direction, and what is the product that is evidence of that work, right? And I think
that's kind of your quality control, right?
Right, it definitely is. And that's one of the reasons why I started really looking deeply into, all right, so where are folks sort of gathering high quality student work? How is it that we can start to look at that as a component of this is what it means to demonstrate progress or to demonstrate competency? And so I had not seen this before, the models of excellence, where they're looking at high quality student work, and actually they have an interesting quality work protocol that I had never seen before. But it was very interesting to see, all right, so if we are doing this well, what does it look like to have high quality student work as the outcome? So by demonstrating these behaviors in the classroom leads to this particular outcome of the actual demonstrated work. You are nodding a lot, so I wonder if you have thoughts around how we might sort of make that real for folks, where they are able to demonstrate that in the classroom, these are the behaviors, and then also look at the work that comes out of that.
I guess I like the balance between the process and the product, which I think, I was thinking about the assessment work, the 3-part assessment work that you guys have done this year. And the focus of that professional learning was on developing that assessment task, which is sort of the product, if you will, right? But what happened with that is that you also got this, it influenced the process by which they learned in the class. And so I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking about how do you connect those two. And I liked I think spelling out what we're looking for at the end is always just good practice. So this is interesting that they really spelled out what does high quality work in general look like. I think that's kind of an interesting idea. So I don't know, I'm just
Sort of thinking that
trying to
through.
connect all these different thoughts I'm having.
Well, I like that you are making connection to the next generation science standards and how like demonstrating the competency in those standards means that you are also demonstrating this, right? So one of the outcomes I had for today was essentially to look at obviously examples, right, of demonstrations of competency, but to actually identify what are the things that we would want to capture in a classroom that would demonstrate. So like sort of what are the common elements of all of the things that we saw here, either on process or product? Because what I would like to see us do is, all right, so if we capture this in a classroom, in our APS ideally, right, like not somewhere else, if we capture that, then we tie it to these are the competencies that this is demonstrating, and this is the student work that came as a result. So how do we sort of create that through line? And so I would love for us to brainstorm for a moment. What did you see that isn't essentially something you would want to have captured in our classrooms, whether it's present in, you know, the first set or the second set? And I'd love to be able to just chart a little bit of, and Noah, I'm turning you this way so that you might be able to see the, can you see the whiteboard? And Bev? A little bit of essentially like what are those common elements of things we would want to be able to capture as evidence? Does that question make sense? Do you need an example?
I guess one thing we kind of struggle with the examples we looked at was, I think there is a little bit of a need for context for, it doesn't have to be huge, but just, you know, I know that one of them I looked at, the kids were gathered around an iPad.
Right.
And she hashtagged it real world problem solving collaboration. I'm like, well, I was pretty much taking her word for, you know, for that.
That's
so,
what was happening there.
You know, and so just a little more context.
And I almost see that as kind of the narrative element of the, like what you are capturing there, right? Like this is what's happening in this example of the learning task or experience, right? Especially on the process stuff. I call this captured competencies.
You do not have to worry about whether anything that you spelled that right, because we can't spell.
All right, fair enough.
Me neither.
All right, well, then we're all present here. I like that.
Noah's paying attention.
You're
in a
Noah
safe space.
He's spell checking. I know it. All right, what else would we want to make sure are sort of essential components of the things that we would capture to put in the progression, sort of no matter what?
I'm not sure I completely get this because I was looking at some of the examples and
Yeah.
now I'm royally confused. I would want some sort of reflection.
Say more about that.
All the visuals of student work were a task that the teacher asked for learning. And I would want a reflection that the learning went somewhere else. None of these skills seem to represent learning. For example, like this one, I'm learning some sort of math. Fractions related to factor, I don't know, smallest number. I have no idea what this means, but it's a task the teacher gave me to learn a skill. Or I think these skills are asking, great, you know how to get the lowest common denominator, but so what? So I want some sort of reflection on the student. I think this is hard because in order to do this at the level I think it's meant to be done, our tasks that we give students must be very different.
Yeah, and that is definitely
I don't
something
know,
that I
yeah.
grappled with, right? So like, can we look at sort of traditional tasks for 21st century skills and these competencies, or is that like a false sort of outcome that we're like, well, the task wasn't designed to incorporate
Yeah.
these, right? So how can we actually expect teachers to demonstrate that when the task wasn't designed to support it?
Or it was forced.
Or it was forced, right?
Like for example, on here, the example of the hypothesis for investigate. Well, we have some tools in the science realm that describe what investigate really means. And a lot of that is, seeking questions, identifying it to a phenomenon, explaining the phenomenon, and the result of predict, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
how do we
That's a process.
mesh some of that? And I would say the tasks that lend themselves to be more of these are larger questions or problems the students have a variety of pathways to solve. So that's where the reflection piece would come in. How did I think about using the knowledge I have to
Yeah.
solve this problem? But again, I think the tasks have to shift that we ask kids to do for the kids to be able to demonstrate.
And I'm thinking, you said reflection, which I think is great, and I'm almost wondering if it isn't student voice.
Yeah.
And student voice maybe is like, but it's like even in those tweets, if they had said a student quote from a student, that would have given me maybe more insight into what the kid was actually, for me to give him credit for collaboration, I kind of I want to hear or see, quote a quote or whatever, what their voice is.
Well, like the virtual heart, or I don't know what they did, that one picture.
Yeah.
Where they had some sort of virtual experience.
Right.
Well, every kid's gonna be asking a question because they're like, oh my God, I saw the heart, or whatever it may be, but I would want to know that that was tied to some bigger thing, or that there was some sort of thinking in addition to it was a cool experience, because we fall into that a lot with STEM. There's a cool experience, and of course kids are engaged and excited, but is it building a robot because I followed the Lego directions, or is it building a robot because I had to solve a problem? You know what I mean?
The lions attacking.
Like my kids can follow Lego directions from now until eternity. Do I think they really can demonstrate any of these skills? Not quite yet, because they're following Lego's directions
Right.
on how to build a.
So I think
So I don't know.
I was trying to think about how I would articulate what Ray had said.
Well, so the way I was kind of interpreting it was there could be a group demonstration, which was most of what that first set was,
Yeah.
but that actually the personal evidence has to also come apart as a part of that. So that is student reflection, or it could be just the product of how it fits into the larger scope. And I think by presenting like the learning task as context also really helps to say like, all right, this is the task that happened there. This is what it looked like as a group. This is the personal evidence there. And this is the reflection, sort of purpose and voice that are a component of that. To me, that feels very much like, all right, if we were going to capture not just the one snapshot, but sort of all of the things around the periphery that sort of are able to demonstrate, right? I think that to me gets us a lot closer to saying, not only does this teacher demonstrate that they have the ability to create that learning task and support the students, but the individual student is then responsible for that as well. Noah, any thoughts?
This is a slightly tangential, but one of the things that you brought up that kind of just like we don't want teachers teaching to a test, we want like awesome instruction to lead to kids doing amazing on an assessment, right? And so in that same sort of spirit, we want awesome instruction to be leading to demonstration of competencies. We don't want to set up anything that leads to teachers feeling like they have to teach to a competency. Is that too out there? They're like, it's not like,
No,
oh no,
I
I need to demonstrate exploration, so now I'm gonna find a way to tie in exploration. It's more, I'm doing amazing standards-based instruction, and if I look and bend the competencies to meet my instruction, I can see that I've demonstrated exploration. That sort of authentic approach is probably what we're going to find benefits kids the most.
Agreed. So it's not treated as a checklist. It's treated as an authentic interaction.
Right, which is, I think, maybe one of the reasons why I'm so stuck in the actual competency progression is because it feels like we are sort of forcing these things into their own little buckets rather than like, this is a learning task and it has elements of these competencies inside of it. This is what the context for that learning task is. This is what the student reflections were on that learning task. And so to me, it's maybe more about the examples of what it looks like to demonstrate competency in a K through 2 classroom, right? A learning task that would do that with the students' work and reflection as a part of that, rather than like we are creating a new framework for checking things off.
I think that is so important, Ben, right? And whoever made that last comment, was that Ryan, about like because we see that with on the student badging side, where as soon as we start giving teachers examples, like they started to refer to that document, even though it said sample student evidence or something like that, they started to call it a rubric. And that there's just this huge risk factor, I think, in putting out anything like a guideline about that. And I'm sorry about the barking, but there's a huge risk factor that turns into the checklist, and checklists are bad.
This conversation has really taken me a lot further, and I think hopefully the work a lot further in sort of saying, all right, so what can we do that isn't a rubric to show what it looks like in those different areas? And the spreadsheet was very helpful for me to sort of develop a few of those examples, but when you add a visual element, it's like, you cannot separate these things. How do we keep not separating them? Bev, you were thinking about something, I know.
Yeah, one thought I had is I understand the authenticity and we don't want it to be a checklist, so totally agree with all of that. But there is how do you bring it to the surface of planning or thinking about kid work, and kid task development in a way that doesn't leave it to chance either. And I think about, and I'm not saying this is the perfect model for it, but like in IB, in their planning, it's a little bit like a 3-part assessment, if you will. When you're developing your units, there are a list of skills, and I forget the exact terminology because I have lots of different categories, probably more than is productive at times. But you select a theme that you want to develop fully in the context of that unit. You highlight some skills that you want to really, not that they can't use others, but you bring that, it's more of a focus so that over the course of the year, you make sure that and certain ones are required, at certain years or whatever, because they want to make sure over time kids get all that. So how's the balance between that and not leaving it to chance? Because one of the things is if a kid is not very good at, say, collaboration, and we never kind of draw attention to that, how do we do that? I don't know. How do you not leave it to chance? Because otherwise, the only kids who might end up demonstrating it are the ones who already have that skill. You know what I mean? How do you? And
developing the skill is also very important, right? So doing that through a learning task or learning experience. So
I think think you're hitting on something bigger and Ryan's hitting on something bigger. That is kind of a, how do I culturally and relevantly plan for a lesson and a task? And I think what Ryan's talking about is, how do I look for or go into a classroom and think about the cognitive engagement and the emotional engagement, not just the behavioral engagement? Because some of what we're seeing is still just reiterating behavioral engagement, right? Like the kids who are on task. I took pictures of kids who were on task. Versus it being like what Ryan's asking there is cognitively, what are they getting out of this?
Yes.
Emotionally, how.
Sorry to bother you guys. There's a meeting coming in at 2 o'clock.
Yep. I think we're getting ready to pack up.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the thinking, and I want to hit that idea of the cognitive, social engagement side of things. What I'm going to challenge us to do is, when we are in schools over the next probably week, 2 weeks, would you take a couple of pictures for us to talk through what this looks like and think about the context for learning task and like what the group demonstration and personal evidence would look like on that side of things. I'll write it up, but yeah.
Have you seen the Buck Institute has some rubrics on some of these already?
No, would you
Yeah,
share?
So here's an example of a creativity and innovation. And they break it down in those buckets.
Thank you, Noah. I will see you later.